You're listening to a 58 Ember production.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and if you are navigating a faith deconstruction too, or simply fascinated by faith deconstruction journeys, by Mormonism specifically and religion generally, then you are in the right place. Thank you for being here. I am so excited about today's episode because today we are telling spooky, scary. I've been looking forward to this for months now. I love hearing scary stories and reading scary stories anyway, but then having this religious element to it somehow makes it spookier. And I feel like but lots of spooky stories have some sort of religious element to them anyway, because we are often talking about demons and ghosts and possession and things like that are of a spiritual, supernatural nature. So I think it's really fun to get into this stuff, especially as deconstructed religious people. I was trying to think of the scare level to prepare you all for. I know some people don't like scary shit, which is super understandable. For me, I feel a lot more scared watching things, so I'm kind of careful about the scary movies that I watch, but I love reading and hearing scary stories. Not having the visual is really helpful for me. I have not watched a scary movie yet this October. And I always think I want to watch a scary movie and I get excited about watching a scary movie. And then 5 minutes into the movie, I say, why am I torturing myself this way? I think because Bentley also travels for work, I just don't want to put any too scary things in my brain, because even if I can handle it in the daytime, when it is nighttime and I'm home alone, I know that it's going to come back to bite me or to haunt me. I'll just give you a warning before the really scary ones in case you want to skip over those. And also, thank you to anyone who took the time to write in. I'm always so grateful when people write into the podcast. And these stories specifically, we've got some very detailed and also, might I say, very well-written tales in here. So thank you for taking the time to really not only share your story, but to give all of those spooky details. First story. Someone says, on my Mormon mission in California, an older Hermana in the ward, so a sister in the ward, sat us down in her living room and confessed that she can see spirits. She said she sees them all the time, and there were several in the room as we were talking. Sometimes she saw her dead neighbor walking his dead dog outside, and they would wave to each other. In hindsight, I'm wondering if this was her real alive neighbor. Things got darker when she told us how an evil spirit lives in her bedroom and would wake her at night. She would always do the Mormon angel handshake test, and upon learning the spirit was not heavenly, would use her cross to banish it, as she quoted scriptures to it. Put a pin in the Mormon angel handshake. I'm going to explain that in a minute. She said it worked like a charm every time. She also told us how when she went to the temple for baptisms for the dead, the room was filled with hundreds of spirits all wearing the clothes they died in. You could tell how worthy they were based on how white their clothing was. If it was grayish, they were less happy and less worthy, and those were the ones who wanted baptism the most. After they were baptized, their clothing would turn white and they would cheer. This part is kind of wholesome. I don't hate this idea, and part of me believes her stories. She spoke so earnestly, you could tell she believed what she was saying. And in the thick of my Mormon mission, I wanted to believe there were spirits, ancestors maybe, who were watching out for me. I still can't decide if it's true or not, but leaning towards schizophrenia. Sweet lady. Sweet lady indeed. The neighbor that maybe was just a full alive person and not actually a ghost is funny to me. Let's talk about the Mormon angel handshake test. I talked about this last year because I did a Spooky Stories episode last year, and this was the first I had heard of this, or I think I had remembered hearing something kind of about this, but never fully understanding it. There is in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is an additional book of scripture that Mormons believe in Doctrine and Covenants, section 129, Joseph Smith teaches how to discern whether a being appearing as an angel is from God or if it's a, quote, deceiving spirit. And Joseph Smith, says that there are 3 ways to identify the nature of the being. Number 1, if it's a resurrected angel with a body of flesh and bones, they will offer their hand and you will be able to feel their hand. If it's a spirit sent from God, but not yet resurrected, they won't offer their hand, but it will still deliver their angelic message. But most importantly, if it's an evil spirit pretending to be divine, they will attempt to shake hands, but you won't feel anything because they lack a physical body. So this handshake test is meant to provide a way for Mormons to distinguish if a spirit appears to them, whether or not it is a good spirit sent from God, either a resurrected being, a good spirit who's not going to mess around with a handshake, or if it's a deceiving spirit. And if so, then you won't feel their hand, though they offer it to you. This is a tool that, I'm not going to lie, I'm not sad to have this in my back pocket just in case some sort of spirit appears to me and I got to figure out if they're good or bad, sent from God or otherwise. I don't know, give them a handshake. Can you imagine your first instinct? You're getting haunted by some spooky, scary ghost and you have your wits about you enough to just simply offer a handshake. You feel a hand and you're like, sweet, we're good to go. Or even worse, you do the handshake test and you don't feel the hand. What then? I guess you would just cast out the demon in the name of Jesus Christ or whatever. But I think the handshake test is one of my favorite little bits of Mormon lore. I think it's so fucking funny that Joseph Smith thought this was important enough to write in the Doctrine and Covenants how to distinguish ghosts, essentially. This story also brings up an interesting thing about baptisms for the dead. And I just was realizing how much there is in Mormon doctrine and theology about spirits, especially because Mormons believe that after you die, you will go into sort of a limbo waiting room for a certain amount of time where you're either in spirit prison if you've been bad on earth or spirit paradise if you've been good. And it's not until Christ comes back to earth that then you can move on from that like everybody will be resurrected. Every time I try and explain this cosmology, I forget how it exactly works. Because I think if you've been good and gone to the temple and stuff, I don't think you have to wait in spirit paradise. I think you go straight to heaven. But I think maybe people who just haven't accepted the gospel yet, like haven't been baptized, that's when you're either in spirit paradise or spirit prison. And anyway, the whole thing suggests that there are spirits kind of in limbo. And some of them are unworthy and some of them are maybe more worthy, but they're waiting for people on earth to do their temple work by proxy so that they can then move on out of limbo. That's a really interesting, when you use different words around it, that's a really interesting ghostly story to tell about the afterlife that Mormons really believe. And I just don't remember growing up ever thinking that much about how I fully believed when I was a Mormon that there were spirits, that there are essentially ghosts, and then also with the resurrection that there could be people, angels, according to DNC, that could come back in a full body with flesh and bones. It's all just very fascinating, very interesting. I'm so excited. This might seem tangential because this movie, Heretic, is coming out soon, a horror movie about Mormon missionaries, which is so spot on because so many of these stories are from those of you who have gone on Mormon missions. There's a lot of overlap there. This one is not so much, as far as I can tell from the trailer, about ghosts and spirits, but I do think there's potential there for someone to write a story that's a horror film about Mormonism that's more based on the ghosts and spirits thing. Could be interesting, but I cannot wait for Heretic. I'm so excited. Okay, next story. My patriarchal blessing said that I would personally know that the devil can have a body and walk among us. After I got my blessing, I would stay awake in bed, imagining the devil appearing before me in the flesh. I was convinced I was going to be kidnapped or experience some other gnarly, violent crime. I was already an anxious kid, and that sent me over the top. Leaving the church finally freed me of the dread of that patriarch being right. I cannot with these patriarchal blessings. You're going to get your patriarchal blessing. That's a special blessing you get once in your lifetime. As a Mormon, you're often a teenager or young adult, and it's supposed to tell you what your future holds and give you advice from God. And it says, you will personally know that the devil can have a body and walk among us. Excuse me? Imagine hearing that as a teenager. Being like, okay, cannot wait to see how that manifests in my life. Now I'm on the edge of my seat to see how I figure out how the devil can have a body and walk among us. This is also interesting because as far as I understand LDS theology, Satan was not given a body, and it's such a gift for the people who get to come to earth and live in a body. And the fact that Satan doesn't have a body, I always remember being emphasized as a really big deal. Maybe this patriarch was saying Satan or the devil could possess people. I'm not sure, but that seems to contradict what I know of the theology of Satan and the devil. And regardless, let's just not tell teenagers that they're going to see the devil walking among them in the flesh. Let's just not do that. Okay, next story. My great uncle was super into treasure hunting. Nice. He found out that in 1520, King Montezuma ordered his legendary treasure to be removed and buried to protect it from the Spanish. There's a bunch of rumors of where the treasure is buried, but my great uncle did a bunch of research and believed it was buried in southern Utah, specifically in a lake that was set up exactly like the old Aztec water traps. He bought the land and tried to drain it to get the treasure, but wildlife services stopped him because there was a super rare breed of snails in the lake. He then sent divers down, but they came back up, refusing to go back in because they said they felt they were being choked by ghosts. He hired a drill to drill down into the caves and look for the treasure, and the drill driver had a heart attack and died halfway through drilling. My great uncle himself actually died looking for the treasure when on the way to the site, a horse came through his windshield and killed him. For a while, my family held on to the land because they believed that the lake was haunted with ghosts that were protecting the golden plates. They couldn't believe that there would be that much supernatural activity unless it was from God, LOL. However, after a few years, it became a hazard and they decided to sell it. I guess protecting the golden plates became less important over time. Wow. Talk about Mormon lore meets Mormon horror. A family has this lake. They think treasure is buried there, which is very Joseph Smithian of them because the founding prophet Joseph Smith of the Mormon Church was really big into treasure hunting. I didn't know there were still people super into treasure hunting, but apparently there is. Thought that this special treasure was in the lake, but then when all the ghosts were, killing the drill guy and choking the divers, then they assumed that it was actually maybe golden plates that the ghosts were protecting. This is also really interesting because I did a bunch of research for an episode last year in October as well about Joseph Smith and all the folklore magic stuff he was into. And there was this huge thing about people believing that spirits would protect treasure. So if you were searching for treasure, they would sometimes haunt you and things like that. So this is very much in line with original Mormon thinking. It seems funny to me that God would use ghosts that would ultimately kill humans in order to protect the golden plates, but who knows? Also, the golden plates, for those who don't know, that is what Joseph Smith apparently translated the Book of Mormon from. It's the original book that Joseph translated, and then Moroni the angel, who showed him where the plates were, took it back. So maybe Moroni the angel hid them in this southern Utah lake and then provided some ghostly protectors. Okay, next story. My grandma was Catholic and actively did Santeria. Santeria is kind of spiritism, rituals, and sort of witchcraft. Okay. When she passed away, the house had a lot of objects, and in the prohibited room where she performed her rituals, we found a lot of weird items. I was not allowed to touch them, and my mom and aunts got rid of it all. Weeks later, after her passing, my mom and I went to clean the house. As soon as we walked through the door, we felt something very heavy in the air and a weird voice whispering. My mom turned to me and asked if I was feeling the same, and we ran out so fast. We came back 3 days later with some holy water blessed by a priest. As we walked into the house, my mom was splashing the holy water on the floors and walls, and I was right behind her. My whole body got the goosebumps, and I saw the water as it was falling. It was evaporating. It was like smoke coming from the walls and floors. We got closer to the prohibited room, and my mom just dumped the whole bottle of water on the door without opening it. Even more smoke came out, and as we started running out, a real horrendous scream came from that room. I never went back into that house again. I'm always approaching these stories with a huge dose of skepticism. I don't know. This sounds like a famous last words thing. I don't think I believe in ghosts, really. And I don't know, maybe I haven't looked into it enough. Maybe this is just my skepticism gone so far that I just can't imagine that there's any sort of actual ghosts. Like, I do think there's something about spirits living on in special ways and ways you can connect, maybe through energy or something. I don't know. I'm not completely out on the idea, but I do think probably not. And then I read stories like this, and it's really difficult to come up with alternative explanations for why the water was evaporating off the walls, why there was a horrendous scream from this prohibited room, and how it all lined up with where this grandma performed her witchcraft rituals. I don't know. That's really spooky. I definitely think homes can have a certain energy about them. So I can see how a house could feel haunted, maybe not necessarily actually haunted by actual ghosts, but just holding some darker energy, which that also sounds just as woo-woo as the ghost thing. I don't know. But this story is really spooky. Next story. Once, one of my mission companions and I were teaching a new investigator. We set up an appointment in a member's home to teach this investigator and have dinner. After we'd all finished eating, we began to teach a lesson. All of the sudden, the investigator's eyes rolled into the back of her head and she started thrashing around like an animal. At first, we thought she was maybe having a seizure, but almost as soon as it started, it stopped. She sat on the couch hyperventilating and then started yelling and speaking in complete gibberish like she was possessed. My companion and I got the hell out of there, but didn't feel comfortable going home and bringing a bad spirit home with us. We called our zone leaders. That's just missionaries in some authority position, and they met with us outside our house. After telling them more about what happened, one of the elders got a super serious look on his face. He threw his arm up to the square and started screaming, "Get thee hence, Satan! I command you through the power of Jesus Christ to leave at this instance." We all then went home and went to bed. I look back on that now and just laugh, but in the moment I was completely freaked out. I wonder if there's some sort of medical phenomenon. I'm sure there is, right? Where if you do have a seizure, you could be speaking gibberish after. I don't know. Maybe there's something there. That elder getting so serious and being so ready to cast out Satan himself through the power of Jesus Christ, you know that was a moment that he wrote home about in his missionary email of the week, that he cast out the devil. Next story. This one's pretty spooky. When I was a missionary, possession was a highly talked about thing. I always didn't think it was real until we went to go visit this lady we had contacted earlier that day. When we entered her house, I immediately got a very eerie feeling. She decided to show us around the house, but while doing so, she grabbed my companion by her wrist and began dragging her around and saying really creepy things. She dragged her into the bedroom and threw her onto the bed, and at that moment, the TV that had just been static immediately started playing pornography without the lady even touching the remote. I grabbed my companion and yanked her up, and we started to run off, and the lady turned to us and said, "Obedecemos Jehovah," aka we obey Jehovah, and immediately put her fingers behind her head like horns. My companion and I grabbed hands and bolted out of there. When later on asking neighbors about the lady, they said she had got into some freaky stuff, and it often seemed like someone was talking in place of her. It still makes my heart pound just thinking about it. Speaking of Heretic, that Missionary movie, maybe not the best idea for two young women to be entering anyone's home alone, just the two of them, or two young men for that matter. There is a rule that you're not allowed to go in if it's a single man, but women can also be scary and can also do scary things, less so than men, I do believe. But I mean, women can be just as into devil stuff, apparently. I'm kind of confused about the we obey Jehovah thing. Also, ew, her using we, even though it's just her saying we obey Jehovah. I just fully felt that. Who is the we that she's referring to? That's really creepy. I'm confused why she would be saying we obey Jehovah and then do the devil horns, because Jehovah is Jesus, as far as I understand. But all that seems to be getting mixed up in some scary ways with this one. Next story. When my mom was growing up, they had a really old church building with an attic above the stage. Weird things started happening, like things being moved around the church building. They ultimately found out that there was a man living in the attic. And since the church wasn't used for most of the week, no one noticed. The scariest part was my grandma would go and practice the organ for church by herself in the church building while the person was living in the attic. So unsettling. These ones really get me. We actually just finished our basement, so we now have a finished basement. We haven't furnished it or anything, so we don't really go down there. But because we don't really go down there, I do sometimes have a spooky thought of, what if someone just lived down there? There's a big closet. There's also an under the stairs little nook that you have to go into and then kind of turn a corner. There's a little around the corner section. And I know it's irrational, but I do sometimes get a creepy feeling of, what if someone was just living down there and you just didn't know? Not knowing you are sharing a physical space with another human is so spooky. And that grandma finding out that she had been playing the organ by herself, which that is brave in and of itself. An old church building and you're going in there by yourself and playing the organ of all things. But finding that out, that there had just been a man physically present the whole time, is really freaky. Although I will say that the church building does sit empty for a majority of the week. And I do wish that that space was being used to help the community more. And especially in winter and things like that, I know a lot of churches open up so people who are unhoused can live in their church buildings. So maybe this man just needed a warm place to stay. It sounds like he wasn't doing anything nefarious, just found a warm place to lay his head, and it happened to be in the attic of an old church building. On my mission, my female companion laid her hands on the head of a woman in the ward and, quote, exorcised a demon from her. No context on that. That's all we've got. I don't know what led them to this point, but a sister missionary exorcised a demon from a woman. Important to the rest of this story, women, I do not believe, are supposed to exorcise demons from people. I think that is something reserved for the men that have the priesthood power. So I think that's a no-no, that this sister missionary exorcised this demon. Later that day, she said she had to release the demon, and she did so in our apartment. Couldn't have found a better place to release the demon. That night, the whole apartment lights kept shutting off on their own, which was very creepy and put us all on edge. 20 minutes later, she ran out of a room freaking out because the demon, this is such a spooky visual. The demon was in the room manifesting itself as someone walking upside down on their hands, but with their head right side up. I hate that visual so much. We literally ran from the apartment screaming and almost stayed the night in the church building, but the elders in our area broke curfew to come over and bless the apartment. Even after the blessing, the apartment lights would all shut off so often. The companion who exorcised the demon was almost sent home from the mission due to what she had done. I had so much PTSD from the event, and it made me so scared of the dark and any strange shadows. To cope, I broke mission rules and secretly bought a pair of wire headphones so I could listen to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. That's just the Mormon choir. I think they changed the name now that we're not supposed to say Mormon. Every night to help me fall asleep. For years, I would wake up screaming at night because I was scared of demons in my room. Even now that I don't believe in demons, I can't sleep in a room alone. Oh, and to solve the lights mystery, it turns out the building just had bad power supply. So if we ran 2 or more appliances at once, it would trip the breaker so it wouldn't overload. The power shutting off that night was a coincidence. We had laundry running and someone was trying to microwave a snack at the same time. That would make me feel a lot better. I'm glad you figured that out about the lights, that was just a coincidence. Still so scary in the moment. The power going out, no matter what circumstance it is under, is very scary. It's a very unsettling thing to not have access to turning on lights when it's nighttime. I can't believe that sister missionary was almost sent home for exorcising the demon. Again, we didn't get much context on that, but I'm assuming it's because she was a woman who was not allowed to exorcise demons. And if women should be allowed to do one thing in the LDS church, I feel like they should be allowed to exorcise demons. I feel like that is a right that women particularly deserve. If a demon were to listen to anyone, it should be a woman. I do think that companion should have released said demon anywhere else besides your apartment. And I'm really sorry that you had to deal with that. I even feel spooked saying this. I've never had an encounter with the supernatural at all, of any sort, not even something close. So anytime I read stories like this, I just wonder, maybe that's why I'm so skeptical, is because I've just never had anything similar to that. I was actually talking with a friend the other day, and she has gone to a medium that she completely swears by. This medium just said a lot of things to her that just really she doesn't believe could be coincidence. She had this information about her that my friend knows that she couldn't have found out on the internet or any other way. She just had a really compelling experience with a medium, and it was actually a really lovely experience. It wasn't anything spooky. It was just connecting to spirit guides, that type of thing. I kind of want to try it. I'm really curious. I'm really skeptical. I'm also nervous. I just feel like any sort of messing with any of that is maybe just not something I want to do. It just might get in my head at least. So I don't know. I'll keep you updated if I do go see a medium. I know my dad went to see a medium probably a couple years before he died, and he said he had a pretty interesting experience with it. I think it would be something interesting to do. The thing that I found particularly compelling about the medium my friend went to is she doesn't do it for money. She's not advertising herself as a medium. She claims she just has this gift of seeing spirits, and she sees them everywhere she goes. And she will do readings or whatever you want to call it on people that are just friends or referrals, because she's not trying to make a buck. And I think that's a big thing that is an immediate turnoff for me. Not that people shouldn't be paid for the services they render, but having a medium do a reading and paying them a bunch of money for it, I just get suspicious and skeptical. So anyway, who knows? Maybe a medium, the right one, would make a believer in ghosts out of me. This one is a doozy. When I was at school at BYU, Idaho, I had a roommate who was involved with witchcraft. I'm talking spell books and everything. One night, two of my roommates had been sleeping in my room because I wasn't home that night, and they felt a very unsettling presence, specifically in one corner of the room. Skip forward a day or two, and I come back to the apartment. I go to sit down at the desk in my room to eat some food when my sister's dog that I was watching started barking like crazy. It was a low growl bark, and there was quite literally nothing that instigated it. All of a sudden, the lid of my jewelry holder flew off the dresser and almost hit the dog. My roommate and I were shocked. An hour or so after the lid incident, we hear a knock, similar to the knock pattern in The Conjuring. I don't know what the knock pattern in The Conjuring is. Let's look it up. I'm scared. I know this is going to spook me out. I have watched The Conjuring a really long time ago, but I think most horror movies I've watched, I'm usually closing my eyes for most of it, so I don't really remember. Conjuring knock pattern video. I'm scared.
Who is that?
Okay, I'm really scared. There's like doors opening and stuff, but I guess just that knocking pattern, I don't know, you could kind of hear it maybe. Now I kind of want to watch that movie. Okay, so they're hearing this knocking similar to The Conjuring. Neither of us did anything, but a few minutes later we hear the knock again, but this time it was louder. We decided to check the door to the apartment to see if someone was in the hall knocking, but the hallway was completely empty. We went back to our room and decided to turn on some hymns to calm ourselves down. I don't know, man. Hymns still calm me down when I'm feeling paranoid, even though I left the church 2 years ago. Understandable. But a few minutes later, we hear the same knock again. This time it was so loud, it sounded like it was coming from within the room. So we immediately packed up our backpacks and left the apartment. I had some family in town, so we headed to their place to work on homework while we waited for the other roommates to get home. As we were leaving the apartment, the dog started barking and freaking out again. And there was a man sitting in the hallway not far from our apartment wearing all black with his head down. What spooked me is that he didn't even flinch when the dog started barking. Fast forward a few hours, we go back to the apartment because two of my roommates were back, as well as my roommate's boyfriend, and we were discussing if we should talk to the witchcraft roommate and confront her about it all. During the conversation, we all started feeling so ridiculously scared and unsafe, so much so that we all went into the living room, got on our knees, and had a prayer circle, all four of us girls praying and bawling. We packed up overnight bags and decided to spend the night at one of my roommate's parents' house, and we ended up having her dad, who is a sheriff, come, as well as my dad, who's a social worker, hold an intervention with the witchcraft roommate. She ended up moving home a day or two later. My dad blessed the apartment, and that was that. Looking back, it feels like a fever dream, and I still can't believe I lived that. I don't know what to make of it now as a post-Mormon, but I do know that the fear I felt was very real. BYU, Idaho can be a wild place. Yeah, sounds like it. If my roommate were practicing witchcraft, I think I'd be pretty pissed off because don't want that energy around in my apartment. The jewelry lid flying off the jewelry box is probably the freakiest thing about this story to me. The knocking is really scary too. I feel like there's ways that the knocking could maybe be explained, like a prank or something. But if you really saw an object fly across the room out of nowhere, that's really scary. The dog thing too, this is maybe part of why... No, it's not part of why I don't have a dog right now. But I remember I was staying at my friend's house once. I think I was watching her dogs overnight, and they have 2 dogs. And those dogs, any sort of movement outside, if it was a squirrel or anything, they would start barking. They would run across the wood floor and start barking. And it was so scary to be home alone with those dogs, because part of you thinks, well, dogs might help me be safer. There's an intruder or something, but there's nothing spookier than being alone in a house at night and the dogs just starting to freak out and bark at something outside. I hate that feeling. Next story. This is not my story, but my aunt's. After my aunt and uncle were married, they lived in my mom's house for a little while. He worked for the airport, so his hours were weird and he'd be gone in the night a lot. One night, in the middle of the night, my aunt heard my uncle calling for her in the backyard of the house. She went to the window and saw him, or a figure like him. She found it odd that he was there, as she recalled he had just kissed her goodbye to leave for work. He supposedly called out for her to let him inside because he forgot his keys. He was being super pushy and acting like it was urgent. She went to the sliding door and went to open it when what she says was a booming voice in her mind, which she chalks up to being the Holy Ghost. She went and woke up my mom and begged her to pray with her. Whatever it was in the backyard started yelling and growling at her to let it in while they were in the middle of praying. She spent the night in my mom's room until my uncle got home a few hours later, none the wiser. They finally gained the courage to go outside the next day and found zero evidence of anything having been there. My aunt to this day swears it was a demon. Yelling and growling at her? A human being of human figure growling? I don't like that at all. At all. Who knows what this could be? I would say it could have been a dream, but then she woke up the mom, and it sounds like the mom can confirm that there was a figure growling at them. Really scary. If Bentley ever needed me to do anything in the middle of the night, I would not do it. Anything. No, if he were sick or something, I would help him. But if he wasn't home and was calling to me from another part of the house in the middle of the night, I'm staying in my bed. This next one is by far the spookiest one. I've been thinking about this one a lot, so buckle in. Oh, also, the writer of the story says buckle up because this is a long one. I served my mission in Korea and had a couple of really weird experiences in one of the areas I served in. One morning, after I'd woken up and used the restroom, my companion confronted me and asked, "Did you do this?" She was pointing to her bed, which was a trifold mat on the floor that was covered with a fitted twin sheet. When my gaze followed her finger to the ground, I'm pretty sure my stomach fell right out of my asshole. In the middle of her bed, there were 3 slash marks in a row that cut all the way through her sheet, but didn't leave even the slightest mark on her sleeping mat. The cuts were clean with no fraying threads and literally looked as if Wolverine himself had slashed the sheet for fun. My first thought was that maybe she'd gotten up before me and taken a knife to the bed just to play a prank on me, but when I looked at her face, I could see absolute terror etched into every inch of her expression. This wasn't a joke. My mind jumped into action, trying desperately to come up with a logical explanation for the shredded bedding. My companion had told me that she used to sleepwalk a lot, but I had never witnessed her doing that. I thought it was possible that maybe she had risen in her sleep, gotten a knife, and slashed the sheet unconsciously in the middle of the night. The terrifying thing about that was the fact that her bed mat was only 2 feet from where I had been sleeping. The only thing that felt odd about that was the fact that I was an extremely light sleeper and woke up to basically everything. I found it hard to fathom I could have slept through a slumbering slasher moment when it had to have happened only a few feet from where I was. We took a photo of the 3 slashes across the bedsheet the morning it happened because we didn't know what else to do. It was such a weird occurrence that we felt we may as well document it. Somehow, though, that photograph has since disappeared. Between the 2 of us, we have every other photograph that was taken during our time together as missionaries except that one. We both remember taking the photo and seeing the photo afterwards, which is why it's so weird that neither of us can find it now. We lived on the bottom floor of a 4-story apartment complex. A few weeks after the shredded sheet incident, we were both startled out of sleep by loud thumping noises coming from the apartment above us. When we checked the time on the alarm clock between our beds, it was around 3 a.m. Witching hour. I'm so sad I ever learned that 3 a.m. was witching hour, because if I ever wake up in the middle of the night and it's any time between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., I get scared, which is silly, but true. We both made a grumpy comment about how rude it was that our neighbors were making such a ruckus at such a late hour on a weekday, but then we both turned over and tried to fall back to sleep. Before long, the bumps and bangs from above us grew even louder, and the sound of a crying baby was added to the commotion. It lasted 45 minutes before all the noises eventually faded out. Unfortunately for us, this wasn't an isolated incident. Several times a week, right around 3 or 4 in the morning, we'd hear the same noises and the same child yelling or crying in the apartment above us. I grew up in a family with 9 kids, so it's safe to say that I'm not easily bothered by a little noise. This was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It became such a common occurrence that other missionaries began to comment on how tired the two of us looked. About a week or 2 after I returned home to the States, I got an email from one of the male missionaries who was still serving and living in the same area that I had been in before I went home. As I read the words he sent, a chill went down my spine. He and his companion had been going door to door in the neighborhood. They came across the door of our upstairs neighbors, the one who had caused us all of those sleepless nights. An elderly man answered the door, and the 2 missionaries chatted with him. These 2 missionaries had been making fun of me and my companion because of how tired we'd been during those months living in that apartment. They knew all about the little kid who would keep us and its parents up all hours of the night. When the old man answered the door, they felt it was only natural to ask him about his family, whom they assumed were living with him. He told them he didn't have any family and that he lived completely alone. When they asked him how long he'd been living there, he told them he'd lived there for over 30 years. What had we been hearing every single night at 3 in the morning? What child was endlessly terrorizing us with their shrill screams? To this day, anytime I think about the chaos of the noises that would wake us up during the night, I feel a pit of terror rising like bile in my throat. A few weeks after the wild neighbors started causing us sleeping issues, I fell seriously ill. I ended up in the hospital multiple times a week and had a very hard time keeping food down. After a month and a half of being able to really keep any food down, visiting the hospital frequently and trying to figure out what was going on with me, we were never able to find any real cause for my illness. I remember getting home from the hospital around midnight one night and collapsing onto my sleeping mat. My companion collapsed onto hers beside me. We both laid in silence as we tried to fall asleep. We had a couple of desks in the other room for our missionary studies. As we were near passed out, we heard the distinct sound of our desk drawers sliding open and someone or something rifling through them. Terror gripped my body and I felt like I couldn't move. I turned quickly toward my companion. When my eyes landed on her equally shocked expression, I knew she heard what I heard too. I could sense her terror from where I was laying. I willed myself to stand, illness and all, wearing nothing but a t-shirt over my garments, and looked for something to defend myself. The only thing we had in our sparsely furnished missionary apartment was a broom. After a deep breath and no time to talk myself out of it, I slammed the door to the office open with the end of the broom. The light inside the room was off, and to my relief, but absolute confusion, nobody was there. Several of the desk drawers were hanging open. When I made eye contact with my companion again, we both burst into laughter. We didn't know what else to do. I was shaking, but the adrenaline was working its way out of my body and I was overcome with exhaustion. We kept telling ourselves over and over that we must have not heard what we thought and that we must have just accidentally left several of our desk drawers hanging all the way open, even though it was very unlike us to do so. Somehow we convinced ourselves that it was all just a bunch of coincidences, though looking back, I'm not so sure it was. To this day, I'm still trying to come up with explanations for what happened during those transfers other than the paranormal, but I have no idea how to make sense of any of it. I have thought about that photograph disappearing a lot since gathering these stories. I read that one and I read it again and I just read it again. And the way that all of those events came together is what's so scary about it, I think. The slashes in the sheet, the noises above them, finding out that the person above them was just a single man, and then the illness. Having an unexplained illness like that amidst all of this strange, unexplained activity would really send me spiraling, especially as a Mormon missionary, very far from home. Sounds like this person handled it like a badass, but that is very haunting. And I wonder where that picture is. I wish so bad that they still had that photo because I want to see it. The 3 slashes, maybe there's some sort of lore or something that someone could find. about some sort of paranormal something that slashes things that way. Also, if it was her companion sleepwalking, so frightening that a sleepwalking companion slashed their own bed just feet away from yours. Any explanation is scary, but does seem suspiciously supernatural. I agree. I served my mission in Brazil, and it seems like run-ins with spirits are pretty common. One day we met this woman and got talking with her. She was very interested in learning more about the church, but she did let us know that she has a spirit named Michael who is always with her. Casual. We didn't think much of it other than using that as a segue into teaching about the spirit world and the plan of salvation. That's a missionary mind right there. Oh, you have a spirit friend named Michael? Perfect. Have you ever wondered what happens after we die? My companion was a little superstitious. That phrase calls to mind, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious, a la Michael Scott. If you know, you know. So we decided to have this woman meet us at the church. She was right because this woman immediately let us know that Michael was waiting for her outside the church gates. He was not happy about her coming into the church either. During the whole lesson, she kept looking around anxiously, and it put my companion and I on edge. The woman did want to meet with us again, so we set another appointment with her at the church. When the day of the appointment arrived, my companion and I got to the church early. The elders happened to be there as well. My companion and I sat outside the church waiting for this woman for quite a while. Then she gave us a call. She said she was running late but was on her way. In the middle of talking, she went completely silent and then asked us if there was anyone else at the church with us. We said no, but she immediately called our bluff and said, Michael knows someone else is there and does not want me to come. This thoroughly freaked us out, and no matter what we said, this woman did not end up coming. We tried going to her house, but she would always hide from us if we dropped by. Michael. Michael knew that the elders were there. How do you explain that one too? Obviously, this woman sounds, I don't know. Maybe she had a spirit ghost friend named Michael. Who am I to say? But I can't imagine that feeling in your chest when you're on the phone with her and she's like, wait, Michael's telling me someone else is there at the church with you. Ooh, so spooky. You are brave for going back to visit that woman at her house. Thank goodness she ghosted you. No pun intended. I would not mess around with that anymore. And sounds like Michael was very adverse to Mormonism. So likely not a Mormon spirit because he didn't like messing around with the Mormon church. My dad was our stake president while I was growing up. That's the leadership position beyond a bishop. So there's a bishop over a ward, a stake president over a bunch of wards. He had to perform a few exorcisms on stake members as part of his calling. Oh, just part of the job. The story I remember most vividly was when a missionary in our stake returned home early from a developing country for health reasons due to an altercation where a local man attacked him and his companion. Scary. They were mostly fine except for a few cuts he noticed afterwards. Within a few days, he started feeling ill and quickly became sicker and sicker until he had to come back to the States. For context, this country has a lot of lore involving demons, possessions, magic, and stuff like that. After a few days home and in the hospital, the missionary's family called my dad asking for a priesthood blessing, saying that some strange things were going on, specifically that the elder's face was starting to turn into someone they recognized less and less each day, and he was saying some bizarre, scary things in and out of his sleep. My dad went over for the blessing, and he told us that when he walked in the hospital room, he felt a terrible, dreadful feeling and confirmed what the family had said. He hardly recognized this missionary anymore. They looked like a completely different person. My dad and some family members gave a blessing that he said felt like it lasted for hours, but it was actually only a few minutes. Once they opened their eyes, the missionary looked like himself again. My dad was someone who took his calling very seriously, and I never heard him joke about these kinds of things. He really believed that this missionary became cursed or was some type of possessed. I haven't believed in the Mormon church or any type of Christianity for a while now, but spirits, demons, and possessions still spook me to this day. This sounds like an Edgar Allan Poe type story. Any of you Edgar Allan Poe fans out there? Or maybe it's reminding me of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Who wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray? Ooh, my BYU English professors would be so disappointed. Oliver Wilde. Oliver Wilde? Is that the right name? Everyone listening is like, we don't give a shit, Haley. I know you don't, but I need to remember this. The Picture of Dorian Gray. Oscar Wilde. Is that what I said? Oliver, maybe? Yes, Oscar Wilde. I think that's a story of someone who paints a portrait of himself, and then the portrait starts sucking the life out of him, and he gets increasingly distorted and creepy in real life. I feel like there's a handful of stories like that, but not something I would want to see in real life, especially after getting attacked by a man on the street as a missionary. Very spooky, very freaky. Are we starting to feel like missions are really scary? Because I'm starting to feel like missions are really scary. So many of these stories are from missions. And the next one is too. On my mission, I lived in a place where witchcraft is very common. We had a neighbor in his 60s who gave me and my companions creepy vibes. Sometime in the middle of the night, we heard cats crying, strange music, and even screams near his apartment. One day, he asked us for hair or nails for an experiment he was doing. We, of course, said no. We started to have weird dreams where something or someone was screaming our name and knocking our door, and the dreams seemed very real. Our apartment started to feel very strange. We saw shadows, our lights went off, we were not able to sleep and started to get sick. One night we were writing in our journals when I saw someone walk from the living room to the kitchen. I thought it was another missionary who we shared the apartment with, but it was not. We got very scared because we also started to hear weird noises like someone crying, so we had to call our district leaders. They said they were coming to bless our apartment, and as we were waiting for them, I saw a demon face in our living room window, the same face that I saw in my dreams, and I don't remember anything after that. Long story short, the mission president ended up coming over to sleep in our apartment while we slept in the mission president's home that night. We didn't know what they saw that night, but we had to move immediately. I was given a blessing from my mission president and was told by him and my stake president to never tell this story to anyone. But I'm not a Mormon anymore, so here I am. Well, I'm glad that you could tell us that story and didn't have to keep your promise to mission president. Really creepy and unfair that he told you not to tell anyone. Also, this person said at the bottom, sorry for my English. So I'm assuming English is not their native language. I'm so impressed by you, whoever you are. Writing in another language is something else entirely. I actually just had an opportunity. I got interviewed by a German media network about Mormon stuff. I'll tell you more as things unfold. They're doing some sort of story on the secret lives of Mormon wives. Anyway, I had the opportunity to speak German again, and that was hard, but I was thinking about writing in German. I never got very good at writing in German. So anyway, I'm just always very impressed by people who are bilingual or multilingual. I think it's so cool. That's a spooky story. The demon face, same as appeared in the dreams. The man asking for your hair and toenails? No, thank you. If someone wants to experiment with your hair or toenails, hard no on that. I'm so curious what the mission president claims to have seen that night, that they had to emergency move you out of that apartment. Sounds like things were getting very, very spooky. Let's end on a bit of a lighter note, shall we? This one is just kind of funny. Someone says, my high school seminary teacher told us that the reason why we shouldn't drink alcohol is because being drunk makes us more susceptible to being possessed by demons. Apparently, that's why alcoholic drinks are called spirits. I wish I was making this up. I wish you were making that up too. I wish I were surprised, but I am not surprised that your Mormon seminary teacher was telling you that if you drink alcohol, you will essentially get possessed by a demon, hence the name spirits. Now I'm wondering where that actually originates from. Oh, this is kind of interesting. Alcoholic drinks are called spirits due to the process of distillation, which dates back to ancient times. The term comes from alchemy, where distillation was seen as extracting the spirit or essence of a substance. When alcohol is distilled, it separates from the water and other components, creating a more concentrated liquid. This idea of capturing the spirit or essence led to distilled alcoholic beverages being referred to as spirits. Oh wait, the word also carries a mystical or spiritual connotation in earlier centuries, as distillation was often associated with early scientific practices and beliefs in transforming substances. Over time, the term stuck and is still used today to describe strong distilled liquors like whiskey, vodka, and rum. That's a fun fact for the day. I didn't know that. I guess there is something a little bit witchy about calling alcohol spirits. Witchy, alchemy, potion type shit. But not because drinking alcohol makes you more susceptible to being possessed. I don't think that that's the case. I've taken my chances a time or two, and so far so good. No possession for myself drinking alcohol or for anyone I know who drinks alcohol. No possession happening while they were a bit tipsy. Thank you so much. If you wrote in a story, I might, no promises, but I may be doing a part 2 of scary stories because there's a lot more where that came from. So we might be doing something similar next week. We'll see. I just love getting into the spooky spirit of Halloween so much. So thank you for joining me, for being here today at Girls Camp. I hope that I will see you next Wednesday. In the meantime, you can follow along on YouTube, Girls Camp Podcast, on Instagram, Girls Camp Podcast, on TikTok, Haley Rawl, or if you want more content, come join us on the Patreon, Girls Camp After Dark. That's at patreon.com/girlscamp. And we are having a grand old time over there, getting to chat with each other. There's 2 bonus episodes a month. It's just a real fun time. So I would love to see you there too. Talk soon. Bye.
GIRLSCAMP, it's Girls Camp.
This has been a 58 Ember production. For more shows, please visit the 58 Ember channel, 58ember.com, or find us at 58 Ember Media on socials.